Okay, I'm trying something a little bit different. I'm recording a case video on my laptop, so I don't have to set the camera up and do the editing and all of that. So it might cut down on some time from me because it's a pretty long process. These are the cases from week 2, and so there are not that many of them. And some of them are pretty interesting. So let's get started. I'll see where I can post this in your class. Um, but hopefully this will work in a pinch. It's not the highest resolution, not the best lighting, but we're gonna do what we can. All right, we're gonna start with Edmonds versus Edwards on page 170. It's the case. So this is the section where we're talking about who has the ability to get married, who has the mental capacity, the correct age, all those sorts of things. And this is kind of a sweet little case about two people who were institutionalized years ago and had been institutionalized for a long time for being unable to care for themselves fully. And the husband in the marriage had been institutionalized since 1939 when there wasn't a lot of options. And at some point, he meets another patient and falls in love with her. Her name is Inez. His name is Harold. And they start a new life. And they start a new life during the time frame 1969 when we were starting to institutionalize people less and give people more resources to live on their own. And that's what was happening. And they decided to get married. Now, because they were already under the care of the state and they were already being supervised from being institutionalized, there was, quite a bit of oversight to their marriage. Harold had a conservator, a guardian. If you've watched what's going on with Britney Spears at all, same sort of thing. Someone was appointed by the court to take care of him financially. What's going on with her is really weird and interesting if you have a minute to look at it. But same exact thing. And so he's got a conservator. Before they get married, people are a little concerned about them. As people are concerned about people who aren't institutionalized when they get married, if they get married young or don't know what they're doing. And so the marriage was postponed. They had premarital counseling. They had premarital sex counseling. I assume perhaps these people needed help to understand how children are made and all of that. And eventually, 2 years after they got married, Harold's guardian brought a suit to annul the marriage. I don't know what that trigger was, but it took 2 years. And I don't know. So in order to determine whether or not Harold, because there was testimony that Inez was probably less impaired than Harold was, and so the conservator brought the suit saying Harold did not have the mental capacity to be married. All right, so there were experts called in that regard. The state's expert, the conservator's expert, the first expert, was not that solid in saying Harold didn't have the mental capacity to get married. He went into a colloquy with him and said Harold knows it's for life, knows you stay married forever, and said he did not believe that he was competent to enter into the marriage contract, but then gave testimony that Harold knew what the marriage contract was about, and then said he's a person who's 59 who is not as bright as most people. Well, that's not a disqualifier. So then we move to Harold's experts, and Harold has an expert that said he was able to understand what marriage was and went into the fact that he was able to understand that he would be responsible for Inez's bills, which we've talked about marriage being a civil contract and you pay for each other as person. And then one thing he was asked, did he understand if they got divorced he might have to pay alimony? His answer was, I'm not sure. Do you know any 18, 19-year-old people who get married? Even younger with parental consent, as we'll look at in a second, who have never heard of alimony, who do not understand the finances, who do not understand the financial. Do you know any people, my age, mid-40s, who still do not fully understand the financial consequences to marriage. Yeah, also not a disqualifier. So looking at the rest of the case, court says what I think is lovely language because I've used it. In law, marriage is considered a civil contract to which the consent of the parties capable of contracting is essential. Goes on to say it's not the same kind of contract as buying a car, but it's a civil contract. We're looking at contractual capacity. And then they talk about the statute where it lays out that a marriage is void if someone does not have the mental capacity. And then it says this: marriage contract will not be declared void for mental incapacity unless at the time of the marriage such a want of understanding existed as to render the party incapable of assenting thereto. Mere weakness or imbecility of mind is not sufficient to void a contract of marriage. There has to be enough, a lack of mental capacity to the point that people do not understand what marriage is, do not understand what they're getting into. And so the court in this said, this is a valid marriage. He knew what it was. He knew it was for life. He knew it was to take care of each other, to live together, financially, to support each other. And the court said that is enough. I'd be interested to know what the trigger is, what brought this 2 years later, where the conservator brought this. But as we've talked about before, just like in contracts, the mental capacity to get married is pretty low. It's a fairly low standard. And that is Edmonds versus Edwards. Edmonds being the guardian of the estate, or the conservator at that point, and Edwards being Harold Edwards, the husband. That's that case.